Francis Bacon, we all know the name, right? The father of the scientific method, a true giant of the Renaissance, one of the most brilliant people who ever lived. But the story we think we know, well, it's only half of it. And believe me, the other half is much, much darker. I mean, think about this. His own biographer, R.W. Church, literally starts his book with these words. He's basically saying it's painful to even write or read about this guy's life. And that's because it's a tragedy on a grand scale, a story of just unbelievable genius being completely undone by some really profound personal weaknesses. And that really brings us to the big question we're tackling here. How does a man who saw so clearly how to lift up all of humanity fail so spectacularly at saving himself? What on earth happened that led to his shocking, catastrophic fall from grace? To really get it, you have to understand what we can call the Bacon paradox. Here was a man who had this sublime intellect. He could see right into the heart of human potential, our greatness, our flaws, our ability to find truth, and our talent for fooling ourselves. He understood all of it, and yet he just couldn't live by his own wisdom. When you boil it all down, it comes back to one single fatal flaw that just poisoned everything. In the words of his biographer, he was a pleaser of men. He just could not resist the allure of immediate power. He thought he could play the game, manipulate the powerful by seeming to agree with them, by submitting. But in the end, that very act of submitting is what would completely ruin him. But okay, before we get to the fall, we have to talk about the dream. Because he had this magnificent, all-consuming vision that was the real passion of his life. Just listen to the sheer audacity of this statement. He's only 31 years old, and he basically declares that his life's mission is to completely reform all of human knowledge. He wanted to create a brand new way of understanding the world, to give humanity total command over nature, all for the good of mankind. It's just staggering. And right there, that was the central conflict of his entire life. See, to fund this grand, world-changing dream, he believed he needed two things: power and money. So you have this insane contrast. While his mind is soaring, planning the conquest of nature, his days are spent in the grubby, messy reality of court politics, always looking for a better job, constantly begging for money, and just enduring one humiliation after another. And this relentless quest for power forced him into two relationships that would come to define his life, and ultimately his disgrace. First, you have his lifelong rival, Sir Edward Coke. Coke was the greatest lawyer of the age, a brilliant, absolutely ruthless man who looked at Bacon and saw a philosophical dreamer, a pretender. And for decades, Coke stood right in the middle of Bacon's path, blocking him at every turn. But Bacon had one true champion, the Earl of Essex. And Essex wasn't just some patron. He was a real, genuine friend. He saw the genius in Bacon when nobody else would, and he fought like hell to advance his career. Essex was Bacon's single greatest hope for making his dreams come true. And this is where the story gets really tragic. In 1594, Essex fails to get Bacon a promotion, so he just gifts him a valuable estate out of his own pocket. But Essex was proud, and he was reckless. In 1599, against Bacon's direct advice, he leads this disastrous campaign in Ireland. 2 years later, he's disgraced, desperate, and he stages this pathetic, doomed rebellion against the Queen. And guess who gets chosen to be one of the lead prosecutors at the treason trial? His dear friend and beneficiary, Francis Bacon. And in that courtroom, Bacon didn't just participate. He took a leading role. When the trial seemed to be going badly for the prosecution, Bacon stood up and just clinically dismantled his friend's defense. With these words, he publicly urged the man who had given him everything to just confess to treason and accept his fate. Essex was executed. Bacon, for his trouble, got a £1,200 share of the fines. The betrayal of Essex cleared the path for Bacon's rise, but it was a foundation built on sand. After years of service, he finally reached the very top, which just set the stage for one of the most sudden and shocking falls from power in English history. By 1618, he had it all. He was Lord Chancellor of England, the most powerful judge in the entire kingdom. This was the job he had craved his entire adult life. He was at the absolute summit of his power and influence. But it only lasted for 3 years. In 1621, Parliament starts what seems like a routine investigation into corruption in the courts,
And the investigation leads, to everyone's absolute astonishment, directly to the Lord Chancellor himself. The charge was breathtaking, taking bribes to influence his judgments.
The fine that Parliament recommended was £40,000. To put that in perspective for you, you could buy a pretty nice country estate back then for under £2,000. This was an absolutely ruinous, astronomical sum of money. And that fine was just the beginning. The full sentence was just total and complete ruin. Imprisonment in the infamous Tower of London, a lifetime ban from court, and being declared forever incapable of holding any public office. For a man like Bacon, this wasn't just a punishment, it was the end of his world. And this, right here, might be the most shocking part of the whole story. Faced with these career-ending charges, the greatest legal mind in England didn't fight. He didn't offer a defense. He didn't question a single witness. Instead, he just completely collapsed, offering a full, unreserved, and immediate confession to absolutely everything. He was utterly broken. And in his final years, stripped of everything he had ever worked for, we see the final, tragic version of the Bacon paradox. Bacon lived out his last 5 years in shame and in debt. But here's the final irony. Once he was freed from that desperate, endless pursuit of power, he entered one of the most productive periods of his entire life. It was in his ruin that he finally had the time to dedicate to his true passion, writing some of his most important philosophical works. So, how did Bacon see himself in the end? Well, the contradiction that haunted his whole life is perfectly captured in his own words. He would maintain until his death that he was the justest judge in half a century, claiming that no bribe ever actually influenced his final decisions. But he also admitted his punishment was the justest censure in 2 centuries. He knew he was guilty, even if he believed in his heart he was still pure. And that leaves us with the question his life really forces us to ask. Francis Bacon gave us the tools to build the modern world. His vision of science literally transformed human history, but his personal life was a tragedy of ambition, weakness, and betrayal. Can we, or even should we, separate the glorious work from the deeply flawed man who created it?